What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Beyond the Wire podcast. I'm your host, Tim Keller. Along with me, as he always is Mr. Matt Disher. To all you fine listeners, viewers, you don't have to just stare at Matt and I this week. Well, I guess you kind of have to stare at Matt and I because there's another Matt on the show. We have Chief Warrant Officer Matt Luther joining us today. Matt Luther, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me here.
Awesome, man. We were just talking a little bit right before we went live. Matt joined the Ohio Army National Guard back in 1992. He is 29 years, 6 months of service. So that is A, a very long time, but B, one hell of a dedication. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, thanks. And I just want to point out, I joined the Army. I was in for 9 years active duty. Then I joined the Guard.
Okay.
But it's been 20 years plus with the Guard at this point.
20 years with the Guard. And you're a Blackhawk instructor?
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So I was 11 years old when Matt joined the Army.
Yeah.
And, you know, as I said before we went live, I'm not trying to make you feel old, Matt, but I mean, we're almost the same age, but I was 11 years old when you went in.
Yeah. Hey, I'm coming to grips with my age. You know, over time, you get more and more used to it. The fact that, hey, you're one of the old guys in the unit.
Hey, so, some of our brothers and sisters in the service are a little bit older. And, Matt, before we went live, you said some of your brothers and sisters in the service right now are a little bit younger as well.
Oh, yeah, quite a bit. Many of them born after I went to flight school. Yep. Yeah. I remember the day it first happened when, talking to somebody and they're like, hey, I was born the year you joined the Army. And I'm thinking, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. I bet.
I was in the Savannah airport because I was going to Hilton Head, and Hilton Head, as you may know, is right next to Parris Island, where Marines go to boot camp on the East Coast. And I was in the airport flying out, and I was waiting in the security line, and there was a young devil dog in his uniform just out of boot camp, and I started striking up a conversation with them, like, yeah, I went to Parris Island, I was in the Marines, blah blah blah, and I realized as I'm talking to him, I'm like, I have been out for as long as he's been alive.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm the old guy.
Yeah.
Like I'm talking about the year I went to boot camp. That was the year he was born. Sorry, I've been out of boot camp for as long as he's been alive. And I was like, now I'm the old guy talking to him in the airport security line, and I have no relevance. He's like, whatever, bro.
Yeah,
you're an old timer. You were in back in the day. And I'm like, but it wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
He went to his MOS school or his combat school and went over to his buddies. Man, this old creepy dude approached me in the airport.
Yeah.
Had facial hair.
God, he was 39 years old.
Yeah. God. Yeah. What a mess he was.
What a guy. He was like my grandpa. Anyway.
So, as we normally like to do, we like to go to military.com, pull up some news stories, and we have some good ones this week. This is a topic we've talked about a little bit on the podcast before, but the title of the article is Cheated and Guilty, the Struggle of Troops Who Missed Out on Combat. Now, I know personally, I was with a unit that got sent to Iraq, but literally months before that unit got sent to Iraq, I got orders to go to Okinawa, Japan. So these individuals that I spent so much time training with and sweating and bleeding and just being uncomfortable and dirty and smelly, it's what we were getting ready to do. Mm-hmm. And it's odd to think that people out there, want to have conflict but you don't want anything bad to happen, but it's what you signed up to do. And so this article talks about, military.com interviewed 9 individuals and talked about how, maybe in civilian life, you're not praying for a hurricane to hit or a fire to start in your home or someone to, kick in your door and try to rob you. But for individuals that join the armed forces, some of them, I would hope that all of them understand that there's the possibility of being sent to a conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And for a percentage of those individuals, if there's that opportunity that presents itself, they would like to do it with the people they've trained with. Right. I know personally for me, it was if something were to happen to one of those individuals I spent all that time training with, and I've created these bonds and these friendships and brotherhoods. If something were to happen, I think I personally would have held it against myself for the rest of my days.
Let's dig into some of the numbers here. So, like, roughly 15% of the total U.S. armed forces are actually combat arms jobs. So, when we talk about people join the military to go to conflict, 15% of them do. 15% of them will actually be in combat arms. And what I mean by combat arms is, it's your infantry people, it's your people that are doing combat jobs versus people that are doing veterinarian work, medical, logistics, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't mean to take anything away from those people. The military serves its purpose. In the military, the logistician gets in gunfights too. I don't remember the gentleman's name, but it was like a loadmaster on a helicopter got into a big gunfight and won a Silver Star in Afghanistan many years ago. Yeah. He was a crew chief on a helicopter. He wasn't even supposed to be on the ground and ended up stopping at some fob and got into a gunfight and ended up winning a Silver Star because he was saving lives. But the thing is that 15% of the total U.S. armed forces at any given time, roughly, are combat arms jobs. So you have to imagine that a even smaller or a much smaller percentage of those people are actually engaging in combat. You get a lot of people that get deployed to combat zones. They're in combat theaters, but they're not actively engaging in combat. They're not actually actively doing, the gunfight on the side of the road. They're not doing the helmet cam videos. Now, if you could imagine, if most of those people in the U.S. Armed Forces throughout the conflicts of the last 20 years were actually serving in combat, you'd have a lot more helmet cam footage, a lot more really good helmet cam footage of dudes kicking doors down and fighting enemies. But, I would have to estimate that like 5%, 10% of at a given time of the total armed forces are actually engaged in a combat element.
Yeah, the article talks about one individual who was actually part of a combat unit. They got sent to a part of Afghanistan for about 18 months where they just didn't happen to see any action. So he was in country. They didn't see any action, and he knew other individuals that he, probably went to boot camp with or, went to training school, whatever it was. Somebody else in the article, a infantry specialist, says, I can't talk to somebody because it boils down to me complaining I never shot anyone, which is crazy talk. So these individuals understand, like, the thought of complaining you weren't in combat or I didn't get put in harm's way. Man, I wanted to get maimed. That's not what anybody wants.
Right. Well, and yeah, there's been, if you look at some of the military-based Facebook social media groups and things like that, there's this bloodthirsty gang of people that are out there. And I've always said this, if you run into somebody who is wearing uniform in the airport, you see these videos again on YouTube where people are like, hey, where'd you serve? You serve in combat? You do this? You do that? There's this bloodthirsty group of people that are like, hey, let's call stolen valor for everything, which isn't really the definition of stolen valor in the first place. Saying that you were somewhere and you weren't is not stolen valor by definition. However, that has caused a lot of pressure on people to say, I've seen in Facebook groups, we should have a group called combat veterans and then another group called veterans. And it's like, well, most of the whole of the entirety of the 7% of the U.S. population that has served in the military never saw combat. Mm-hmm. Most of them. I mean, the vast majority of them have never fired a shot in anger or received a shot in anger. So, yeah, I personally watched the invasion of Iraq on the news. I watched my unit and other units like it rolling over the border in the middle of the night. I was in Japan at the time. Fire alarm in the building went off. It turned on the TV when we came back in because it was time to get up for PT anyway. And there it was, shock and awe. Everything started, and the troops rolled across the border. I got to watch that on the news. I had some cool stuff happen before that, but I was never embedded, for months and years at a time shooting at bad guys.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyone that might feel this way, the article does say that, you can go talk to a mental health professional. They're saying it's not uncommon. It's not a sign of major mental health issues. It's something that many, many people that have been in that position have felt before. Mm-hmm. So our next article is 2 U.S. lawmakers, Kabul trip prompts Biden administration fury. So 2 representatives, one a Democrat from Massachusetts and the other a Republican from Michigan, flew in and out on chartered aircraft and were on the ground at the Kabul airport for several hours on Tuesday. That led to officials to complain that they could be taking seats that would otherwise go to other Americans or Afghans fleeing the country. Both these congressmen made sure to leave on a later flight that already had extra seats available, so they weren't taking anybody's seats. Both the representatives put out a joint quote here. As members of Congress, we have a duty to provide oversight on the executive branch. So essentially, these two individuals, both actual military veterans, decided if a group of representatives were going to go overseas and see what's going on in Kabul or anywhere else in the world, and they went through the proper channels, the executive branch would know, the lawmakers in the region would know, security forces, all those sort of things. And there would be, that dog and pony show. Anybody listening to this probably knows what a dog and pony show is, where things would get dressed up or made to appear better than possibly what they actually are. So these individuals didn't want that. They wanted to see what is actually happening in country right now and what's being done properly, what's might not be being done properly, or what could be done better. So these individuals, they conducted their visit in secret, speaking about it only after their departure to minimize the risk and disruption to the people on the ground. And because we were there to gather information, not to grandstand. The two lawmakers, one, a former Marine who's been an outspoken critic of the Iraq war, served multiple tours in Iraq. And then the Republican from Michigan, he was deployed as Army Reserve in Afghanistan, and then later went back to Afghanistan to work for a non-governmental agency. So, I think, there's a time and place for chain of command and the proper steps up and down the ladder. But I think, being that no one was harmed and everybody came home safe, I think this was a good thing. Mm-hmm. I think this is a checks and balances type thing.
I would tend to agree. I think that, it sounds like they were qualified in a way to assess the situation. And, the fact of the matter is that, yes, I mean, it is a check and balance type system. Had they arrived announced, they would have been taken into a room, briefed,
right,
kept there for their safety, not really been able to see what's going on. And it is important because, on one hand, you've got the executive branch and the State Department saying, this is what's going on the ground. You've got the Department of Defense saying this is what's going on the ground. Those are all parts of the executive branch.
Right.
And it is part of Congress's job to say, hey, Mr. President, this is how Congress feels. And, that's the way our government's set up. If they didn't take any seats from anyone and they got out unscathed and they're able to bring back some actionable information that could improve the situation for everybody, not just the Afghanis, but also the U.S. military, I mean, that would be a good thing.
Right.
I think at the end of the day, if they, like you said, Matt, if they're coming back with actionable items and they're not just going over there to try to find things that they can then finger point, and the fact that we had one from each side of the aisle, we had a Republican and a Democrat, that gives me hope that these individuals were looking to work together. Let's go over there. Let's see what could be done better. Let's see what we could, trim down. Is there anything, what's being wasted over there? Let's trim this down. Let's streamline this as best as we possibly can. And let's do this the right way.
Yeah.
So hopefully something positive comes back out of this. I can understand why, the Biden administration was probably, not happy about this.
Of course.
But, it's our voted in individuals doing their job. Right?
Yeah,
That's what I like to hear.
They're also elected representatives, right?
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely. So our last article, and I don't want to say this is funny, but it brings a slight smile to my, like a smirk almost to my face. They're poking at the bear. Let's not forget, we moved these boys off this area quite fast the last time. The Taliban has an image mocking the Marines, showing off their new propaganda savvy. So Matt has posted this picture up now. If you're watching live, you can see it. On the right-hand side is the original picture from Iwo Jima when Marines and one naval doctor were raising the United States flag on the top of Mount Suribachi on the island of Iwo Jima. On the left-hand side, you see looks to be three, maybe there's a fourth guy there, Taliban troops raising the Taliban flag on top of a mountain in Afghanistan. Some people that, study these sort of things say it is 100% apparent, what they're attempting to do here, what they're poking the bear, they're trying to provoke a reaction. And the thought is, is because of the picture on the right being so famous. As a matter of fact, there are, to my knowledge, 2 monuments of the Iwo Jima flag raising. One on Parris Island, the other one at the down in DC. So being as famous as that picture is, I believe that the photographer won the Pulitzer for that picture, as a matter of fact. Being as famous as that picture is, they're attempting to strike some sort of chord. They're trying to pull at some strings, essentially, by replicating it.
I'm frankly flattered. I'm not even mad. Matt said this before we went live. Both of these images are obviously staged, because the Iwo Jima photo was staged too. There was an original one. They originally raised the flag, and then they said the flag wasn't large enough. We can't see it from down below. So they brought up a larger flag. Photographer took a picture, and that's what you have there on the right. There's 2 big differences here. Iwo Jima was a hard-won battle, and I guess you could argue that the Taliban is now probably claiming victory over a hard-won 20-year battle. So fine. Iwo Jima was a monumental battle for U.S. troops in World War II. I mean, it was part of that island hopping campaign. It was a hard-won battle. If you're familiar with Mount Suribachi, the Marines landed down below, went on this island. Basically, nobody was engaging them until they got 200 yards into the island, and then they started. The Japanese troops were dug in, and it was probably a few days of battle, killing lots of people on both sides. And then they raised the flag on the top of Mount Suribachi, so all the people down below and all the ships could see the flag waving, or the flag waving in the wind. I'm flattered that the Taliban would also like to have a moment like this. Now, I will say this, that they had to steal it from the U.S. Marines and U.S. Navy. So that's, but again, there's a phrase, it's something like not copying.
Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
Yes,
there it is.
Yeah.
Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So I'm flattered. I'm flattered that they didn't have one of their own, so they had to steal one from us. Okay.
I do notice that Taliban's not wearing their regular uniform, though. They appear to be quite kitted up there.
Well, that's exactly what this article mentions. Most of these guys don't wear tactical uniforms like this. They don't have all that gear, all the baggage. They got the helmets, they got the NVGs there. I mean, they look official. They look very official. The article made to mention, they definitely did this up for this photograph here. So
I wonder where they got all that gear.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Oh no. That's a whole nother can of worms.
Anyway,
another can of worms. The Marine Corps did not comment on the photo or its similarity. So it's one of those where you're the big bad guy. There's no reason for you to deal with that little guy at the end of the bar shouting names at you. There's no reason for that. So
right. That's what it is.
Yeah. I saw that headline and clicked in on that article, and I go, these sons of guns, look what they've done. So let's get to our guest, Matt, and let's talk about his 29 years of service. So, you said 29 years ago you joined the Army. I always like to start with, what was the kickoff? What got you interested in the military, and why did you sign up?
So it's kind of, my father's a Naval Academy graduate, served in Vietnam, and was wounded there, and also awarded for bravery. And so all 3 of his sons decided to join the Army, which makes perfect sense. But at some point in high school, I knew. So I went out, I got an ROTC scholarship. Thank goodness it was just a 3-year ROTC scholarship, because my first year of college was a disaster. And after some retrospection, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go a different route. Walked into an Army recruiter, and he was a good one. And he said, and he'd known me since I was in high school. And he's, hey, had you ever thought about going to warrant officer flight training? And I said, no, I don't have a college degree. And he says, well, in the Army, you don't need a college degree. You only need 15 college credits at the time. And so, we went through the nut roll, just tons of paperwork. The recruiter was fantastic. I ran into many people later on down the road that just had a very long, difficult road to get into flight school. And it was a interesting time to join the Army. I was 20 years old when I started flying helicopters in flight school. I turned 21 a few months after. Going back to that first, or actually, I guess the second thing we talked about, first thing about veterans, missing combat. I served in the Army between 1992 and April of 2001. And so Somalia happened, Haiti happened, but everything kind of got turned around. Haiti ended up not being combat. Somalia obviously was. Of course, I felt like, wow, I wish I could have gone somewhere. At one point, I was in Hawaii. I was stationed there for 3 years. That was one of my assignments. And
sounds horrible.
It was terrible. Especially back in those days, we got to spend almost the full entire 3 years in Hawaii with the occasional JRTC rotation, And so they were going to send us to East Timor, and we're like, oh, wow, this is great. We're going to see some action. And there was just some civil unrest there. Well, it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. I got out in April 2001. I had declined promotion to Chief Warrant Officer 3. And, just a few months later, 9/11 happened. And, I didn't want to sit on the sidelines. So that's what prompted me to join the Ohio Army National Guard. And I was in the Ohio Army National Guard in May 2002. And, here I am all these years later. And it's been a really interesting and a really fun career. And yes, I did. The first place we went on a deployment was Kosovo in 2004, 2005. That's an imminent danger area, not a combat zone. And we all kind of felt, we had plenty of other Guard units that were going to Iraq at that time. Afghanistan was kind of a sideshow, as you remember, back in 2005. And then in 2009, they sent our unit to Iraq for the first time. And it was pretty sporty. Iraq at that time, the surge was over, and we were talking about leaving Iraq. The Sunni awakening had already occurred, and to a large extent, Iraq was pacified, but there were a lot of things going on. And I got to do some interesting things in the middle of the night with special operations. And I think that's part of the reason for all this gray hair that I have today, almost white hair. But that was really good. And then flash forward to this past year, I just got back from another deployment to Iraq, where I was stationed this time up in Erbil, which is in Kurdistan. And this one was in many ways much more interesting. And also, we got to fly quite a bit into Syria, which was, something unusual, and I'm sure not a lot of people have been able to do. But it's been a good career. I've really enjoyed it, and definitely thinking about hanging up the flight helmet here pretty soon.
That was going to be my next question. 29 years and 6 months. Is there that plan? Is that next step on the horizon?
I think so. Once you reach 30 years, I was just watching The Castle. You ever seen that with Robert Redford and I
don't think I've seen the whole thing.
Yeah. Anyway, there's just some quote he has in there where he's talking to one of the young guys, and he says to him, the guy's talking about his father, who's like a 30-year plus veteran, and he's like, "Yeah, my father was a terrible man." He says, "He served 30 years. He's a good man. That's the law." So
there you go. You'll forever be a good man. It doesn't matter
what you do. I suppose. But yeah, I'm thinking that it's probably time. And as we were talking earlier about, being the old guy, yeah, it starts to weigh on you, because I'll turn 50 at the end of this year, and you're thinking, man, how many more times can I do this?
Yeah.
But it's been a good ride.
That's awesome. Was it always helicopters? Did you want to fly something else?
So I started flying the UH-1. That's how, back in 1992, my first assignment was to Fort Bragg, and I was flying the UH-1. And within a year of getting there, they said, "Hey, we're getting Blackhawks." And sure enough, we did. We got brand new Lima model Blackhawks. Mm-hmm. And I've been flying the Blackhawk ever since. I really enjoyed the time that I had in the UH-1, but the Blackhawk is just such a more capable aircraft. And honestly, there were probably times in my career where I'd said I would have liked to have flown fixed wing. I did give a shot to try to transfer over to the Air Force in the late 90s, and it just didn't work out. And that would have been obviously a very interesting career. I know other people that did that transfer from the Army to the Air Force and had successful careers and some really interesting experiences. But I've really enjoyed flying the Blackhawk. And now today I fly the Mike model Blackhawk, which fully automated, digital cockpit. it's really been interesting to go from the UH-1, which was a Vietnam era aircraft.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah, to the the UH-60, which was more of a 1980s design in the 1970s, and then to the Mike model, which was the same Blackhawk, but I think they put all the engineering and all the upgrades into it in the early 2000s. So it's been pretty fun. And I think the only thing, after flying with these guys and up in Erbil, we were co-located with an attack battalion, a Chinook company, and a medevac company up there. And after seeing those Chinooks in action, I think, man, I really wish I'd flown the Chinook. That would have been pretty cool.
The UH-1, as you said, that was known as the Huey?
Yeah, that's the Huey. Yes.
Okay.
I was going to say the Marine Corps is still flying those.
Yeah.
So
they're just 2 engines, though. So they're quite a bit more capable.
Yeah.
What you mentioned, Matt? You mentioned that you have an all-digital cockpit now, and this is one of
Bluetooth, power windows.
Well, yeah. Hold on. It's the military, so yeah, it's tough. It's yesterday's technology today. That's really what it is. Yeah.
Well, and I'm curious because again, you touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious that over the course of 20 some odd years, I mean, technology in our houses has changed vastly. Have you noticed? Is that as noticeable inside of a helicopter, considering that 20 some odd years ago, I'm sure the systems are, the thing probably flies the same, but the technology and it changes. Is that a big learning curve, or is it just sort of introduced piece by piece? One day you've got digital touch screens versus, old, analog systems or something like that.
So when I went to the course, one of the things that I guess I should mention, I did have a break in service. I retired in 2012 and I came back in 2016. But it was really kind of like riding a bike. And soon after coming in, they said, hey, we're going to send you the Mike model course. It's a 6-week course. And honestly, in graduating the course, you come back and you're like, boy, I still have a lot to learn about this helicopter. Just because you go pretty deep into some of the systems and some of the capabilities that it gives you as you're flying. The flying is generally the same, but it's funny because like in my unit, I got back and there's plenty of other guys at the unit like me, guys that have been flying for quite a few thousand hours, that have been in for 25, 30 plus years. And we call the Mike model the great equalizer because all of a sudden, young people coming out of flight school know just as much about how to utilize the systems on that aircraft as old guys like me. And, I like to think, especially after this deployment, I spent so much time, messing around with the buttons and the switches and the knobs that, I learned a ton that I just wasn't able to do, just doing the traditional, flying that we do with the National Guard. But it was a learning curve, but at the same time, so much of what you do tactically, the tactics don't change. The tactics have certainly evolved during the global war on terror, but the things that I was trained in on flying the UH-1, and the way that we did air assaults back at Fort Bragg, North Carolina in the UH-1 is still the way that we do air assaults today. We used to do it with paper, pencil, protractor, compass, piece of string, and pulling out one over 50,000 maps to, figure out, hey, which direction are we going to go? How long it's going to take us? Nowadays, we just punch it all into a computer, hit calculate, and voila. And then we could take a device from the computer, plug it into our aircraft, and there it is, on the screens on our aircraft, the mission that we're going to fly. So it's super helpful.
Do new pilots coming in have to learn how to do it the old way in case the systems fail? Are there redundancies like that, or? There's
a push to make sure that happens. The buzzword that started a few years ago was the fight against the near-peer adversary again, right? And so much of what we rely on today, first of all, being a global positioning system, is probably, if we got to fight somebody that's got capabilities close to ours, we're not going to have a lot of that available to us.
Right.
And there was probably a period of time where people were not trained on those things, or just, hey, we're going to talk about it today, talk about it tomorrow. You'll do 1 week of this, and then we're going to move on. But that's much more of a push. My understanding is that's much more of a push in flight school today in the Army to make sure that people can do things without the benefit of electricity,
Right.
And it is. It's an important skill. And I will say that even back in the old days, doing it, for some people it was a struggle, and for other people it just kind of came naturally. Just like if you're a grunt, some people are great at orienteering and find their way around in a land nav course, and other people just, it's tough for them, right?
I got one of the first little handheld Garmin GPS systems when I was probably a corporal in the Marines.
Yeah, like a dagger or something like that.
Yeah. It was, I think my dad bought it for me, but he sent it out to me in Camp Pendleton. We were doing some land nav out in the hills out there. But I remember very distinctly thinking, I had some younger guys like, well, why don't we just use the GPS system? And I'm like, because this doesn't work. Like when you need this, it won't work. And this is, systems are far more advanced now.
Through it, or
right, or you talk about the EMPs, or maybe what Matt was alluding to. If we're fighting a near peer adversary and they're taking out our satellites, for example, or disabling our satellites, we're not going to be able to. None of that stuff works. It all goes out the window. Then you got to figure out how to get from point A to point B, and put ordnance on target without the modern calculation systems. And that's probably what it comes down to when all heck hits the fan. It is who can do their job the best with the least.
Yeah. And, I don't know. I couldn't tell you like what all vehicles in the United States military carry inertial navigation systems. But one of the things that I really appreciate about the Mike model is that it's got an inertial navigation system that is aided by GPS. So if you and back in the old days, we had another system that was inertial nav called a Doppler. And the Doppler, basically you told the Doppler where it was, and as you flew along, it shot radar beams at the ground, and it basically says, well, then you must be traveling this fast, and then you turn this much. But it was really not a very good system. And each aircraft, it was interesting. Each aircraft had its own idiosyncrasy. Some aircraft were really good at keeping their position. Other aircraft, you could fly for 20 minutes and be off by 2 miles.
Yeah.
But today, our aircraft has inertial nav, as do, I know like all airliners and stuff have inertial navigation systems as well. So the GPS is updating the inertial nav system. And one of the things that we did practice while we were up there was like, hey, let's turn off our GPS. And oh, by the way, when we were out there in bad guy country, like over in Syria, there's a lot of Russian activity over there. Mm-hmm. We were getting GPS jamming, and it didn't affect our inertial navigation whatsoever. So, you'd still be, after flying for an hour or two, you'd still be about, within 100 yards of where, you needed to be. And for a pilot, 100 yards is, that's not bad,
Right.
So, so there are backups. My bigger concern, if you ever went into a near peer adversary, is just as finicky as the electronics are on those aircraft, like, over time, after a few weeks, like what is going to be working on that aircraft and what is not going to be working, and if it's not working, when do we get the parts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a great question, Matt. That was going to be my question. As a matter of fact, I just picture some like, old crusty, flight instructor, like, Gunny Highway, just shutting everything down. Figure it out. We're doing it blind,
Right.
Yeah. We do. We still have to navigate, what we call like pilotage and dead reckoning. And you'll have a guy pull out the map and, hey, here you go. You got to get from here to there. And again, some people are really good at it and don't have any trouble. And other people, they struggle with it,
Right.
And hopefully, there's 2 people in the cockpit. Hopefully one of them's good at it,
Yeah.
Looking at contour lines as you're flying around, like, is that hill or no?
Oh, God. And if you're flying somewhere that's flat, like I did have this experience at Fort Stewart, Georgia, way back in the early 90s. Holy cow. We didn't have GPS in the aircraft back then. We did, but it was like a box. It was mounted on the side of our pedestal, and you had to turn it was not integrated with the aircraft at all. And it was not user friendly. But nonetheless, Fort Stewart, just flat with creeks, a few hills, tree. It's an ugly place. Don't go to Hinesville, Georgia. And anyway, it was so difficult to navigate around there. But over time, you start picking up, little places and cues and things like that. And it's no different than what the people, the pilots did in Vietnam, right? That was absolutely, every bit of that was just by maps and just learning their backyard,
Yeah.
So over time, people can do it.
Wow. So I see you have a master's degree in business administration.
Mm-hmm.
Is that potentially a route you're going to pursue once you get out?
Well, being a guardsman, I've had a career outside of the military as well. And back in 2000 and I guess it was 2014, 2015, that, my wife and I made the decision I'd become a stay-at-home dad. But prior to that, I'd run the military recruiting program at Cintas, just like Matt Disher, and also had done some recruiting outside of that. I'd been in logistics. That was the first thing that I did when I came out of the military. Pretty common, I think, for people to come out of the service and go into like a logistics leadership role. And so it's funny because long ago, I was in a conversation about my master's degree. I got my master's degree in 2003. That's ancient history, right? Hey, one day I'm going to run into people that were like, "Oh, I was born the year you got your master's degree." People in the workforce, and but it's certainly the study was helpful. But my comment even 10 years ago was like, it really doesn't matter where I got my master's degree at this point. It's all about my work experience and
right.
And that work experience encompasses the civilian side and the military side. But yeah, business is, of course, different facets of business are interesting to me. And there's some things like recruiting is something that I don't want to go back into. I just found it and like right now, hearing about all these job openings and people not being able to come to work. And
yeah,
I've had so many offers, I shouldn't say offers, but so many inquiries about whether I'd like to go back into recruiting. And I'm like, what, in this economy? Like, no way, man. That would be just such a difficult job at this time.
Impossible uphill battle. It is.
Yes. Yeah. It's like you're rolling a stone up every day and every day it falls back down. Right.
Yep.
Just like the old Greek legend.
Well,
so
we've talked about this on this podcast before, that when you've spent enough time in the military, your formal education does not play as important of a role as all of your other hands-on experience. You got, if we're talking 29 years in military service, most of what you know about how to operate as an operations leader, manager, as a day-to-day routine operator, like somebody doing a job in general, is coming from your hands-on experience in the military and not from any sort of formal education. And the reason why that's so important is because this goes back to that whole conversation around people transitioning out of the military after 4, 10, 20, 30 years. Mm-hmm. And employers are like, well, you've got to have a degree. The person with 20 years in the military who doesn't have a degree, the first thing I'll say is you have all these options to get a degree while you're in the military. But secondarily to that, the thing that I tell the employer is, at that point, I don't think it matters. At that point, that person has vastly more classroom time and learning and education and hands-on experience and practical application of operations than any degree program will teach you. And I'll use my own, I value my education, but my own college degree, my own bachelor's degree. When I think back on it, sitting there in a classroom, I was a 20-something-year-old with a bunch of 18, 19-year-olds. I was, in my middle and late 20s. And I was sitting in classes, half of them were those electives where we're talking about things that I'm never, ever going to use again. And then there's the math classes that are revisiting what I learned in high school and stuff that I even used to calculate explosives in the Marines. Just going back through the routine, I don't use that type of stuff in my job. Mm-hmm. I sound like every 16-year-old in high school. Like, I'm never going to use this again.
Yeah.
But
so much of a liberal arts education is to make you a well-rounded thinker, right? Mm-hmm. And obviously the military does the same thing. We could talk about stereotypes, but I think for the most part, people understand that, the folks coming out of the military are pretty much just like you and me, different set of life experiences. But the fact of the matter is, I would agree that, somebody coming out after 20 years without a bachelor's degree, I'd be a little surprised after that much time that they had not gone out and earned that. But the fact is that it is just, another one of the ways that a young person can find their way in this world and be prepared for what comes after either college, what comes after the military, right? There's definitely benefits because, I know that if somebody goes in and gets an education and, they study something like logistics management, yeah, they're going to have book knowledge about logistics management. Right. But how many people do you know that say that they kept their college textbooks like after they graduated college, and then like 10 years later they threw them away because none of it applied? No, right. I mean, it really is about the knowledge that you gain on the job, your ability to be trained, and the way that you interact with others. Right. Those are the things that make people successful.
Right. And similarly to you, back to this question about how much has the cockpit evolved in a helicopter. This is the other thing about, like, in my line of work, Matt, and you and I both did the same job or a similar job. Yeah. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But Matt introduced me to an opportunity when he was on his way out the door to lead the military programs at the Cintas Corporation, and that was, I always give Matt credit this when I'm talking to anybody. That was my big break into leading programs like that. But what we used to do back then was print ads and job fairs. That's how we reached the military talent. The thing has evolved. We don't even do any of that anymore. Maybe to a certain extent. We're still going to job fairs in some cases, but through COVID, we're not. And I think the other point of this conversation, the other thing that the military does that probably better than the civilian world does, if you look at a military career, 10 years in the military, every year or so, that person is sort of shifting jobs and responsibilities.
Oh, absolutely.
They're constantly in an evolutionary process. And similar to corporate America, you can't go to the office one day and be like, wow, this resource doesn't work for me. I quit. I don't know what to do next. You have to go, this resource doesn't work for me. I need to think creatively about how to make this thing work, how to get something up and moving. And that's again, in my own job, that's what happened with day one of COVID-19. It was, everything that we've been doing, all the physical events, all the stuff that we've been doing now goes out the window. We have to adapt and evolve into what happens next. And that is, in my opinion, what the military careerist brings to the table. The ability to constantly evolve. Everything that you've been doing doesn't stay the same. You've been flying helicopters, Matt, for almost 30 years, but to the outsider, it sounds like you've just been flying helicopters for 30 years. That's not exactly what you've been doing. You've been doing all these other things in an ever evolving, constantly changing environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about me flying helicopters for all this time, I have somewhere over 3,300 hours of flight time, right? There are 2,080 work hours in a year. So that means that I have less of 2 years flying in a helicopter after 29 years. Right. And my amount of flight time it's pretty good. It's probably somewhere in the middle for someone who's at, my years of service, right? Maybe even on the low side. But the rest of that time, there were many, many other things that I was doing. The bane of every warrant officer's existence in the United States Army is all the additional duties that you have to do on top of flying the aircraft, Right. And that goes for also, and I can only speak to the Army from an experience standpoint. Of course, I'm very familiar with the other services and, what they do. But at the same time, if you're a senior, even actually nowadays, even a mid-grade NCO, you have many duties on top of your job title, things that you are responsible for taking care of, programs that are very similar to what someone might do in the civilian world. Like, for instance, you've got to be the NCO that takes care of people's drug tests, right? Mm-hmm. You've got to be the NCO that not only runs the arms room, but fixes all the pieces and parts in the arms room and makes sure that everything's operating. And people think, oh, well, it's just a gun. Well, no, it's actually a pretty sophisticated machine, right? Mm-hmm. It can sometimes be pretty difficult to diagnose what's wrong with a machine gun that just, won't happen to fire. Or at the same time, they might be responsible for the dining facility. There they are, they've got to go in and they've got to make sure the dining facility is ready for inspection at all times and that everyone's happy with the food. I mean, there's just a myriad of jobs that people have outside of their military occupational specialty. And veterans, as you know, Matt, they don't always do the best job of explaining that on their resume. Sometimes they don't realize that the highlight of their career might have been something that wasn't specifically part of their job description,
Right.
Yeah. Matt, the three examples you just listed sound like HR, some sort of mechanical engineering and some sort of like event management or
I know it's
facility management. Yeah,
absolutely. And people in the military have to do those things all the time. And, when you go someplace too, like just coming out of Erbil in Iraq, you got to dance with the one that brought you when you get there, right? If there's something that needs to get done and there's nobody on post to do it, guess what? Somebody's got to, go out and spearhead that project. So there's a lot of project management that is involved in, military activities, especially when it comes to airfield improvement. When I was leaving Erbil, they were paving our runways, right? In our ramp space, they were upgrading everything. There was, and it wasn't me, but there was an officer in charge of taking care of all of the contracting, all of this, all the specs for the runway, how the aircraft are going to be arranged. I'm just saying, it is a big job, and it's millions of dollars worth of contract, and it's important. And that person might think that it's pretty mundane because it's just putting asphalt down over grass, right? But at the same time, it's like, nah, that's pretty impressive. And of course we all appreciated it because it meant that we were going to have a lot more area to move our aircraft around in. But it's just an example of the types of things that people might be tasked to do in the military. They're pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's in my industry. That's like construction project management. Or
I was going to say, if one individual, individual in the civilian sector was overseeing that sort of project, the entire reconstruction of a airstrip, logistical layout of how the aircraft are going to be positioned, things of that nature, that person's got to be making six figures pretty easily. That's a big responsibility, easily. Yep. So, Matt Luther, I wanted to ask you. So obviously, Mr. Dishridge let us know earlier that you were kind of the one that pointed him out and said, "Hey, this might be the guy to fill in and take on this role." Let's butter Disher up a little bit here. What was it about Disher that made you think, he's going to be able to handle this?
Well, I think like even right now, being on this podcast that you, Tim, and Matt are hosting and doing this for veterans, what I saw in Matt was a passion for helping veterans and for not maybe making the same. All of us had the mistakes that we made as we were coming out of the service. And, like my mistake would be, I should have gone straight into sales. I should have just skipped logistics, because I just have much more personality for, sales and working through issues and problems and solving people's problems than moving boxes around a building. That to me is not exciting. But what I saw in Matt was passion for, helping military veterans. He had done all the yeoman's work. When I met him, he'd already worked at places where he had learned, the ins and outs. He knew how to recruit. And ultimately, Matt and I have been friends now for, a long time. I'd say probably we met like back in 2007, 2009, something like that.
Yeah.
But when I thought about who in Cincinnati can replace me in this role, the first person I thought of was Matt, and that's another example of networking and veterans helping veterans, right? But I just knew that I'm like, he's not going to drop the ball on this. He is a Marine. He puts the mission first. His mission is helping veterans, and having to operate and run a military recruiting program at a big company, that was just, icing on the cake for him. Right. And, I was very happy to be able to say, hey, I really think you guys should take a look at this guy. I think he'd make a great replacement for me, and that it all worked out. But again, here we are all these years later. I'm not involved in the same thing that you guys are anymore. And, Matt still has this passion. He still wants to help people. He's still making a difference. And I think that that's ultimately, that just proves that, hey, I'm a pretty good judge of character.
Well, I've said it before, but I always appreciate, you being a mentor to me. Before I ever ended up at Centos, we were on events together and doing different things together, collaborating a little bit and things like that. But, here's the thing. I mentioned that Centos was like the big break for me, getting in the door there, being with what is now a Fortune 500 company, one of the largest or the largest in its industry, having exposure to people like Dick Farmer, who recently passed away.
Right.
Dick Farmer was the founder of Centos, one of the wealthiest people in America, and his name is on everything military. If you go to the Marine Corps Museum in Quantico, Dick Farmer's name is on the wall. Like he was involved in all of these things. And so I got exposure to a lot of these different people along the way. and I've been able to, I run a military program now at another large company, and I've done this 3 times now. But I also have the opportunity to touch and influence and mentor, let's call it thousands of people every year, thousands of people leaving the military or who have left the military. And this is from, colonels to E3s and E4s, trying to figure out what the next steps are.
Yeah.
And beyond that, I'm having conversations with other large companies, other Fortune 500s, Fortune 50s, Fortune 10s on how they should craft and build their military programs. Because I say this half jokingly, tongue in cheek. I've written the book on what a military program build looks like. I have an actual document that explains how you build these things from ground up. And I've had that opportunity now to exponentially impact all of these people. And to Matt's point, it was because of the network and because of the passion. That's all I sometimes joke around. I don't know how I ended up where I am. I enjoy every second of it. I get paid to do what I love doing. And if you can do that, there's no better job in the world.
Fantastic.
Absolutely. So, Matt, you brought up sales. Is that possibly the next thing?
Possibly, but really what I'd like to go back into myself is I like to go back into project management, operations management. The sales, if somebody came along to me one day and said, hey, this is the greatest product since sliced bread, and I agreed with them, I would want to sell it, So many times, I think you'll talk to anybody that gets into sales. They might really enjoy the job. There's different aspects of it. The best thing about being a salesperson is when you believe in the product. And, if that opportunity came along where I was going to believe in the product, I'd say yes. But I think the sales that I did it wasn't that long a period of time. It was great preparation for recruiting. But it was also really good at building relationships and talking to business leaders, right? Helping people solve their problems. And that's one thing, if I was ever going to do sales, it wouldn't be a transactional type thing. It would definitely be something that you'd want to work with someone on, like long-term problem solving, something along those lines. But really, like, I look at project management, operations management, and one thing I've realized after all these years is as long as I tried to stay away from it, flying, I'd still really ultimately like to be doing something where I still had my hands in aviation. And fortunately, we live in a part of the country where we've got CVG down the road. We've got Wilmington up the road. And there are big logistics hubs at both of those airports. And so what I might find myself doing is not going back into the logistics part, but, I'd love to go back into, something that had to do with managing the moving of aircraft or pilots or training the pilots or something like that. Because it's strange that I did try the airline thing right before this deployment all started. And I just, after a while, just decided, like, I don't think this is really for me. This isn't the work-life balance that I want. And it's a question of also, at my age, the benefit that I'd get over the max period of time that I could do it, which is 15 years. And I don't know that I want to work until I'm 65 years old. But, it's not as much as it would have been if I'd started this when I was 35 years old, So, but at the same time, I really enjoy helicopters. I really enjoy airplanes. And I generally really enjoy the people that are around helicopters and airplanes, Aviation's a pretty fun business. It's pretty interesting. And there's always something new. That's another thing about aviation that, it never stops evolving. So that's, to me, that's where I'm focusing my efforts right now.
I have to throw this in for a little bit of comic relief, but it's my understanding that they are looking for helicopter instructors in Afghanistan right now. The Taliban might have a job instructing the flight of Blackhawks.
Yeah, I knew guys who worked on the contract training the Afghanis to fly the Blackhawk. Yeah, so I'm assuming that they've probably got some people in house that could do the training for them, but maintaining it, that's the hard part.
Yeah,
that thing in the air, that's the tough part.
Yeah. Yep. Once a gear or a belt or bolt comes loose.
Yeah.
How do they A, get the part, and B, where does it go?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Matt, you brought up the sales thing, wanting to find a product you would like. This is just a story about me not knowing good products, and not that I'm a fan of this product, but I remember I was in Florida. in a boating store in the early 2000s. This was probably 2004, 2005. And I saw these rubber or foam shoes called Crocs. And I'm like, these are the dumbest things I've ever seen in my life. No one will ever wear these.
Yeah.
And if I open the door to my office here and went into the garage, I think my children and wife have about 4 pair sitting out there. So,
I said the same thing about Amazon, by the way, when it came out. I'm like I'm not gonna buy everything online. This is ridiculous.
Yeah. No kidding. It's funny. It's funny how we put our own personal experience. We just say, "Oh yeah, this will never work," and then lo and behold, you're like, "Well, I guess I'm not your average rational consumer." Apparently,
right. Yeah. So if we're talking jobs, Matt, then how does somebody get a hold of you? You're on LinkedIn, right?
Yes, I am.
Are you monitoring your LinkedIn profile?
I do.
All right.
And that'd be great. If somebody wanted to reach out, I'd be happy to entertain. Like I said, you go through this process, you put your resume out there, boy, you get tons of people right now. And that's probably one of the things that's got to be so difficult for other job seekers. I mean, I have some professional experience with parsing through what's a good job and what's not a good job, just like I have some professional experience parsing through a good resume and maybe a not so good resume, right?
Yep.
It's just a shotgun. Like every day I must get like 5 or 10 different opportunities. They're like, "Hey, we want to talk to you about a job doing this, a job doing that." Absolutely none of which interests me,
This is what I tell people when people ask me my opinion on what's happening right now. I tell people that the higher paying jobs, there's not a problem finding people for the higher paying jobs. The more skilled jobs, the specialized jobs, there's no shortage of those people. Mm-hmm. It's the companies that are looking for the $50,000 a year job and below right now, or the $40,000. I don't know what the mark is. I'm just throwing numbers out here.
Yeah, but sure.
Those are those jobs and those salary ranges and below are the ones where they can't get anybody for various different reasons.
Yeah.
Whether it's benefits or people don't want those low paying jobs and they want a higher paying job, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're looking for a higher paying job, if you're looking for a 6-figure job or above, there's not a shortage of people there. And so when you put your resume out there looking for a more experienced job, all of the insurance companies, all of the, everybody wants you to come sell something on a commission basis only, which in some cases, commission only isn't always a bad thing. I know several industries where people are making tons of money on commission only. However, you want to plug into something that's going to have a fruitful career ahead of it. It's not, I'm going to try to sell something to my family and friends, and then beyond that, I don't know where to go.
Yeah.
So that's where it comes down to, quite frankly, it is, a lot of it is what you know. It's what you can, in sales, it's what you know. Can you go out and sell? Do you know the sales cycle? But before that, it is who you know. It's who you know that can connect you to that opportunity. If there are 5 candidates sitting on the table, but that hiring manager knows you or knows of you or has you have a really good reputation in front of them, they're going to select you over those other 4 people. So that's where like you said, Matt, the network comes in. It's all about networking. I say that all the time.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. Disher brings it up all the time. His 3 pillars for someone transitioning out of the military is network, and you guessed it, network.
Yeah.
In his case, right here, the 2 Matts, because of networking, when Matt Luther was on his way out, based off of that face-to-face time, that relationship they had built, Matt Luther understood the type of person that Disher was, the talent that he had, and the fact that if he's given this opportunity, he's going to put that talent forward, and he's not going to let this opportunity, slip through the cracks.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. So we're getting to that hour mark. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. So if anybody out there that listens or watches this has an actual job that Matt Luther could be interested in, he doesn't want to sell your insurance. Sorry. It's just not for him. He doesn't want to, weave baskets underwater. He doesn't want to be a unicorn wrangler. Well, we didn't cover those. But it doesn't seem that way.
He's also not going to be instructing flight in Afghanistan.
Yeah, we did try that.
Yeah,
we did try that. But if you have a potential position available for someone like them, you can reach out to him on LinkedIn. He is available there. Matt Luther, thank you very much for your 29 years and 6 months. Hope you get to that 30-year mark so you can always and forever be a good man.
There you go.
We appreciate you very much for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate it. It's fun.
So with that all being said, as always, you can check us out on all the major social media platforms, as well as all the major podcast platforms. Go out there, give us a like, rating, review. It helps us find new listeners, new viewers, and we would appreciate that greatly. So until next week, you can catch us right here on the Beyond the Wire podcast.